Okay, welcome everyone. So here we have another video, and this is a chess topic that I've been wanting to bring up for quite a while now. So one of the things that happens quite often is when especially newer chess players get into chess, they first learn chess opening principles and some of the basics, which is a great place to get started. If you have no idea what to do at the start of the game, chess opening principles is a really great guideline that you can use because you get a pretty safe and playable position most of the time without having to learn exact theory and memorize openings. And so one of the problems that often comes up, I get this a lot from beginners and newer players who they know opening principles and they've learned some subtleties of it, but they see their opponent breaking opening principles and it's still very difficult to play against. And one of the best examples of this is it's usually not a good idea to bring your queen out that early in the chess game. And of course, there's exceptions. There's always, a few nuances and, when that might not be the case. But generally speaking, it's usually not good to bring out the queen very early in the game. And I feel like a lot of beginners run into this problem where they know it's a bad thing, but their opponents still bring out their queen early and it's still very hard to play against. And that's because the queen is still a very powerful piece. Even though it's not really great to bring it out that early, you still have to know how to play against it. And especially if both players are lower rated, it's very difficult to coordinate everything against the queen, especially early in the game. The queen can still do a lot of damage. So here in this video, we're going to try and simplify it down. We can't show every single queen instance of every opening there is. But I wanted to show two variations where white will bring out their queen very early. And here we're going to be the black side, so I'll flip the board. And basically, we're going to have black and basically defend and see how we can more or less exploit and punish white bringing out their queen very early. So, like I said, we'll go over two main variations, and we'll have a few little moves here and there, kind of sideline type things. We'll do a very thorough analysis. And we'll kind of discuss on the side why bringing out your queen early is not usually a good idea. So here we'll start with e4, and we'll go e5. And my first example, some people might know the name of, it's called the Wayward Queen attack. This one I see very early, especially in beginner games, because they're trying to go for Scholar's Mate very quickly. And so right on move 2, they'll play queen to h5. And I already think this move is a bit questionable, because if you know opening principles, if we go back a bit, you want to be developing all of your pieces, usually of lesser value first. We want to develop the knights to the center of the board. Maybe we want to develop the bishop to an active square, something like here. And, once we push this d-pawn, we'll have the same thing with this bishop. It can go here, it can go here. There's a lot of good developing moves we can go to. And we'll get our minor pieces out, minor pieces being, the knights and bishops. And then we'll probably try and get castled quickly. We'll get the queen off the back rank, connect both rooks, and we're completely into the game. And, now we're into the middle game. It's no longer really an opening. So the problem with bringing out the queen so early is the queen is such a powerful piece. It's other than the king, which is worth the game. The queen is worth the most. And so the problem is if we ever attack the queen, like if we were to go knight f6 right away, the queen pretty much has to move. And the problem if you bring out your queen really early is that you're going to oftentimes get it attacked over and over and over. And then the other side is just going to be developing all of their pieces while this queen has to keep getting kicked around. The other problem with moving the queen is because you don't know where it's best located. I mean, here is this really best? I mean, it's looking at two things, yes, but as long as those things can be defended, the queen might be a bit silly because all of these pieces need to get out. And if you're constantly moving the queen, you're not developing other pieces. So here's queen h5. And I think knight f6 is fine. You could look at this, but I want to keep it simple because right now they're just attacking this pawn. We don't want to drop a pawn. There's probably some complications here, especially when it drops with check. So I actually just recommend just playing knight c6. Simple move, follows opening principles. And I'm sure most people know this is a good move here, bishop c4. It's a standard developing move, but this is a very common thing that comes up. And beginners will recognize this probably because this is a famous checkmate that comes up a lot. There's a very not so subtle threat here. it looked like a normal developing move, bishop c4, and it's an okay move. It does develop. But what they're hoping for is that black will think, oh, well, black should develop. They should attack the queen. And this is a huge blunder here because now this is checkmate in 1. This is known as scholar's mate. And in 4 moves, white has just won the game. So even though black has played good opening principles, this is not the way to fight against this. So let's make an improvement here. So let's go back to bishop c4. What should we do? So I like just play g6. I like simply attack the queen. And again, if the queen has to keep moving constantly, it means those moves are moves that the player is not investing into developing the rest of their army. So here, oftentimes we get queen f3. Again, they're threatening this. It's defended by the bishop. So if we did nothing, queen captures f7 is checkmate. So here, knight f6 is simply blocks this, cuts this off. We're developing a new piece, and black is getting fully developed in the process. Of course, they can't take this knight because we have it defended by our queen, so we're still okay here. And so now, most of the time, when I get this position, if my opponents play it, most of the time I get queen b3, which I think is a mistake. But the idea is very consistent. They were attacking, f7 earlier, from h5, they were attacking it, we kicked it away. Now they went to f3, they're attacking f7, we kick it away. So now it's very consistent to just get this queen and bishop battery, and we attack f7 again as white. And, of course this is going to have its drawbacks, but black has to know how to play against it. Now, before I show this, which I think is most consistent, I want to show a little sideline here that I get very often as well. And that move is, what if white just all of a sudden plays logical? What if they just now switch to opening principles? They stop moving their queen so much. Well, knight c3 I see a lot. And I just want to point out, this is an okay move. It develops, it's fine. But again, they've wasted time with their queen. And I actually just like playing knight d4. We just gain some ground with the knight. We attack the queen again. And queen d1 is basically forced. And the reason that it's forced is because we're actually threatening this fork here, picking up the king and the rook, with this check. So the only real way to defend this is queen d3, but that blocks their pawn, so then this bishop is kind of stuck. So realistically, queen d1 is pretty much the only thing they really have here. And if this does happen in the game, black is doing fine. White has absolutely no tricks. They've moved their queen a bunch, and it's ended up back where it started. So really, if I was black here, I would just continue logical. And I think we're almost into a middle game, really. I think there's a lot of ideas how you could continue. I kind of like just fiend shadowing here and then getting castled. I think that's fine. If you also want to play maybe c6 and then try d5, strike in the center, I think that's fine. I think it comes down to taste and what opening moves you've studied if you get to this point. But I don't think white has gotten anything out of this opening. So I just wanted to show that. What if they switch gears and got some playable thing? Instead of going all out, that would be that line that's most likely going to come up. But if they do go all out, this is very consistent. They keep attacking f7. Well, what do we have now? So the best move here, definitely, by far, is knight d4. Very strong move. And the reason this is so strong is because the queen has to stay on the same diagonal as the bishop if they want to keep attacking f7. And now there's no way this queen can stay on the same diagonal. And what's worse is the queen actually has to still defend c2, because we're still threatening the same fork. So if the queen leaves defending c2, we have this fork and we win material right away. So the most common moves that they could try is, say, they go like queen c3. But then the problem with that is then we just take another pawn with this move, and again the queen has to move again. And already white is losing material and they have a much worse position. Black has definitely won the opening here. So if they don't want to lose the pawn with check, well, how do you defend the c2 pawn and the e4 pawn? And the only way that I see you can really defend both of these this way is to play queen d3. Just defend both this way. And so here's the key move that I'll throw out there, and then after this I'll end this little variation here, which is I like d5. We're getting fully developed. Now now that we've moved this pawn from d7, now this light scored bishop on c8 can get developed. We can go to e6, we can go to g4. It just depends what each side does. But we're just going to strike in the center. Remember, one of the opening principles is control the center. and we're just going to get developed, get all of our pieces into the game. Maybe this bishop will actually go to g7. We're very flexible. And as long as we get castled and just play a normal game, we've survived the opening. And white really hasn't gotten anything by getting their queen out very early. So that was the first, little sideline to that variation here. But the real testing one is if this, don't move the queen, just give a check. A lot of players do that, and king e7 is forced. But white really has no follow-up here, because again, they haven't solved the problem, and they still cannot remain on this diagonal. And so because of that, they're eventually going to have to move the queen. Something like queen b4, give a check. And then we'll just take here, and black is already up material. It's just a complete collapse from white, because they played this opening really poorly with moving their queen out so many times, and black has simply exploited it. We have survived, and we have a very solid position. We just play into a middle game, the game continues, and if everything goes well, black should convert this. So this is this first variation that I had here. So I said there were two of them, two main ones I wanted to show. And the point of this video so far, it's not to get exact moves. I don't want people necessarily trying to memorize all of these moves. The idea is more so we understand why bringing out the queen is a mistake, and then we just play against it. It's a mistake because you're not developing the rest of your pieces, and we don't know if the queen is really best on the square that we put it. So it's better to just wait, develop the other pieces, wait to develop the queen, and play a more normal opening. So a move like queen h5, probably not the best. It's already a bit dubious to be bringing out the queen that early. But you do see it a lot, so it's good to know how to play against it. So here's this separate opening, which comes up quite often, especially at the lower levels. Bishop c4 is fine. There's nothing wrong with this. It's a normal developing move. And so we could go knight c6 just to be consistent with the last one. But sometimes I see queen to f3. Instead of h5, some players know that, people know how to play against Scholar's Mate. So, they just try and mix it up. Instead of going to h5 and then attacking f7, they go to f3. And this isn't really much better. It goes under the same problem. Because here we can just go knight f6. We can block the threat. And unlike before, there's no checkmate here, so knight f6 is playable. We don't have to play g6. And so here, the big problem with the queen on f3 is, again, just like I was mentioning earlier, we've committed the queen to a square that we didn't know if it was best. In the last line, it was h5, and it got kicked around many times. But here, what really belongs on f3? If you follow opening principles in chess, usually that square goes for the knight. And then white castles, and they have a pretty good position. But here, this knight is not so happy that the queen is sitting on f3. The knight would love to use that square, but it's taken. And so the queen either has to waste a move again, or the knight has to go somewhere else. So I think knight e2 makes the most sense. Let's say our opponent isn't doing too much crazy. Let's try and make them improve from the last variation. Last variation, they were pretty much forced to move their queen many times in the game. So let's try and play this here, where they've brought out their queen slightly early, but they're not playing too terribly. Say they play a good developing move, play knight e2. This also stops the knight from coming to d4 and maybe even attacking c4. So this is actually a good move, it has some value in it. So here, there's one key move that's, I would say, good to know. There's other moves, it's not the only move, but I think this is a key idea. So maybe not so much key move as so much as a key idea. And this idea is, whenever we're developing, and the other side has developed their queen really early, oftentimes because they're moving the queen so many times, they're usually not as well developed. In this case, white actually has okay development here. They have these two minor pieces developed and their queen. So actually, black only has two minor pieces developed. So white is actually slightly ahead in development. Which is a bit unusual when they bring out their queen. But one of the common ideas, here's a common pattern to know, is usually if they bring out their queen, the other pieces are very difficult to develop. And in this case, that's white's queen side. And the reason why is because they've done nothing to get these out. This knight is here. This is going to at least take one move to get the bishop out somewhere. So this is already 3 moves just to get mobilized here. And so even though they look okay, and white has an ever so slight lead in development for the time being, I think black has a lot easier, swift development to come. Whereas white, it's actually a bit difficult to get developed. So the key idea is, because black has better mobility long term, it makes sense to actually try and trade off one of their active pieces. And in this case, their most active piece is the bishop. This is actually a pretty good piece. It looks good from opening principles, so it also controls the central square. So I think a move that makes a ton of sense here is to play knight a5, with the sole idea that we just want to trade off this bishop, because our knight was okay, but it was just defending a pawn that wasn't attacked. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to try and trade off white's best piece. So they probably want to stay on this diagonal because it's most consistent with the queen. That way if this knight moves, they have this checkmate. So usually white is going to go queen b3. But let's say they don't. Let's say they go off the diagonal. Let's say they go like bishop d3. And then here, I think, just like before, we just strike in the center. We just play opening principles. We just play d5. And I think black has got a very fine position here. But okay, let's go back here. Let's show what if actually they stay consistent. Let's say they go bishop b3, and they keep trying to stay on this diagonal, keep trying to force things with their, really early queen move, try and justify playing queen to f3. And so in this case here, I think the best thing is for black, just keep doing what you were planning. We went knight a5, usually not so great to put the knight on the edge, but here we had the idea of trading it off. So why wait? Let's trade this off. Let's take knight captures b3. They'll recapture. Pawns usually capture towards the center. It also opens the file for the rook, so at least they'll have some compensation. But again, now that we've traded off their best piece, now we strike in the center. And something like this looks pretty logical. Maybe queen out, because if queen trade is fine, they've wasted a queen move, bringing this out. And here, if we bring ours out and trade it, it can't do much damage if it's traded off the board. And I think a lot of people who bring out their queen very early with a move like queen f3, they usually don't want to trade. If we trade, that just helps black, and then we just play a normal chess game. But most of the time, they're going to decline it, and they're going to try and keep the queen on the board and try go for a bunch of threats. So here, queen g3, I think, makes sense because they're trying to stop black from getting castled, because they're attacking g7. And this bishop doesn't really want to move, because if this bishop were to move somewhere, then they can just take here, and then black can't really castle kingside, and they might be in a little bit of trouble. So queen g3 is a tricky move for that reason. But I think black is still doing well. I think here, as long as they just stick with opening principles and just try and keep getting developed, I think they should be okay. In this case, because they're actually attacking this pawn, I actually kind of like castling queenside. I think there's nothing wrong with that. We'll probably go queenside. White is almost certainly going to go kingside. And then we can have this kind of opposite sides castling type thing, which is a whole pattern in itself, where you get crazy pawn storms or maybe use of an open file. But here, we only need one step at a time. You don't have to calculate everything out necessarily, especially at the opening principles level. You just get developed. So here, I say just bishop d7. Just want to try and get castled. Just, this queen isn't really proving itself. It's not really doing a ton here. So I think black is still in good shape. We're still defending against their early queen moves. They can attack our queen. We move the queen. We're getting ready to get castled. White castles. Looks pretty good. Looks logical. Still okay from opening principles here. And I think castling queenside is probably okay. But I actually have, in this exact position, the unlikely chance to get this exact scenario here, there's a bit of an advanced idea I actually like a lot here. And that move is bishop c5. It looks good because we're developing, a piece, and we're controlling the central squares. In this case, the piece we're developing controls d4, which is one of the central 4 squares. So the bishop c5 is a pretty logical move just from opening principles. So that part is pretty standard. That's not the advanced part. The advanced part is, why can we give up this pawn? That's the idea. And this is connected to the fact that we wanted to castle queenside. If we castle on the queen side, and they castle kingside, we usually want ways to attack their king. And the problem is that their king happens to be on the g-file. So in this case, it's actually very risky for them to take the g-pawn, because then we can get a rook to g8, and we can probably use the open g-file to some kind of battery or some kind of battering ram or some way that we can attack their king. At the very least, we can open up lines of attack. So I think white's probably one of their best ideas here. I would say is probably, if I was white, maybe just play d3 and just play for opening principles. Just get your bishop developed eventually, maybe one of these squares. You know, your rooks are fully connected. I think white and black are probably doing okay. I think it's a close game at this point, but I still think black is doing maybe slightly better even after d3. And maybe that was connected to the fact that white on move 3, they brought out their queen to f3 very early. And I know it sounds a bit superficial to say, well, back on move 3, they made one move and we're still exploiting it. But more or less, that one move created problems. The f3 square meant their knight had to go to e2. Now this queen is over here and, threatening to take this g7 pawn. So there's a lot of ideas that were connected just because that one move that they made earlier in the game. So I think d3 is probably the best try for white, but even still, black would be a bit better. So realistically, what is white going to do? Well, if they don't play d3, if they really want to try and prove themselves and really justify why their queen is out so early, I think the only really way to do this is try and take it. So what happens if they take g7? And so I think this is a mistake, because if they go g7 again, we're going to use this g file for long-term pressure on their king. And this is a very specific thing to this exact variation. But these concepts that I'm sharing, the purpose of this is because oftentimes when they bring out their queen, very similar patterns come up. And the more patterns you see, the better chance you have of finding them in a game. And it's up to the chess player to navigate this and figure out which of these is best or, playable for the situation. But at least if you have some idea, it's better to know it than not know it. Maybe it'll come up, maybe it won't. But if you know it, at least you have a better chance at finding the right plans when they come up. And so here, this rook g8, this is an idea that comes up a lot, where now the queen has to move. The queen doesn't want to give itself up. So queen h6, they couldn't take h7 because the knight defended that pawn. And so here I think, again, castling queenside I think is really good here. But really, black probably wants to use the g-file, double rooks, and they probably want to really put a lot of pressure on white's king. I actually like, instead of castling right away, I actually like playing rook g6 right away, just because it gains the tempo on the queen. Again, we're exploiting the fact that their queen is moved early in the opening, and now we can just keep attacking it while developing pieces. While developing pieces is the key, because now we're gaining time here, because we've invested a move moving a piece, but white has to move the exact same piece again. So here they're going to have to go somewhere, say queen h4, and now we can castle queenside. And it's pretty clear that now we just double rooks. It's a very simple game plan, and we have this really good attack on white's king. Even this bishop is really active, so white is already under attack. And I would much prefer the black side here. We've sacrificed this pawn, but we have clear compensation. It's not even close. We have so many pieces that can attack white's king. Long term, I think this is really good for black. And it all comes down to the fact that white brought out their queen very early. Now, these are the two examples I wanted to show here in this video. I don't want to make it too long here. I want to keep it short and concise. But this can be for both sides. Here I showed both of these openings for white, because usually if someone brings out their queen early, it's usually the white pieces, because white gets to move first. And whenever they move first, black has to do something more or less in response. And then white has this initiative. They're usually the one that decides what to do. And in this case, it could be something like bringing out the queen, one of these squares. Try and play very actively with an open queen. You could say that in maybe the Scandinavian defense, which would be, e4, d5, e captures d5, queen captures d5. It's sort of the same thing, except now it's black who's actually bringing their queen out a bit early. And this is a bit more sophisticated of an opening, because it's got a lot more theory to it. And maybe black is sort of okay here, but I really don't think this is the best opening for black. I think black has probably better options to choose from. And just to show the point, say they just like before, develop with a threat. We attack the queen, and the queen has to move somewhere. And I'm sure players of Scandinavian defense know that queen a5 and queen d8 are by far the two best moves here. And we're not going to go into a whole video on the Scandinavian, but let's just say they go back, just for argument's sake. The black queen hasn't really accomplished much. And this is the point I wanted to make with this video. I didn't want to get into a huge thing of deep opening theory. I just wanted to illustrate some examples where one side brings out their queen, and then we show how to play against it. And so we've shown two examples with the white side, where they went queen h5, and we also showed where they went queen f3. And now we just very briefly commented the Scandinavian, where black was the one who brought out their queen very early, and now the queen had to come back. And so usually it's not so good to develop your queen that early in the chess game. It's usually best to let it wait and then come out later. So this was my short little video here. Just wanted something simple that people can use as reference. You can always come back to this video if you want. I might also maybe in the comments section or the video description or something like that, I might also put a link to the PGN or something, and I could have this all, set up as a PGN so people could always look at it for reference that way. I just want a quick and easy thing we could look at, so that way whenever your opponent brings out a queen very early against you, you should at least know what to do for the most part and try and get a playable position against their queen. So this is more or less how you fight against early queen attacks in chess, and after a while, you're going to actually start welcoming this, because then they're not quite giving you the game, but it makes it a lot easier for you to play against. So I hope this shorter format video everyone liked. You can let me know in the comments and the description, what you think of this, if you like this shorter format, if you like the lessons type thing. And so I hope I'll see you all in the next video.